Hi, it's Josh Goldberg here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm briefly talking about 3 things that destroy a relationship, okay? And these 3 things are very often founded in unresolved past trauma and abuse, okay, from childhood or from a previous relationship. So let's start off with number 1, okay? So the first thing that very commonly destroys relationships is an ongoing feeling of resentment. Okay, so the definition of resentment is a feeling of bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. Okay, so if someone in a relationship often has a feeling of resentment where they resent their partner, the other person in the relationship, this feeling of resentment totally destroys the connection. It destroys the emotional intimacy and the physical intimacy. Feeling resentment or having a feeling of being a victim of the partner or the other person in a relationship is a very common destroyer of relationships, okay? So, like I said, this very often is an unresolved emotion from past abuse or from past trauma, from childhood or from a past relationship. And it very quickly destroys the connection, okay? It makes the other person feel totally misjudged and frustrated and certainly disconnected, okay? So that's number 1, is an ongoing feeling of resentment. So the second thing that I very often see that totally destroys a relationship is a person that jumps to negative conclusions or that makes negative assumptions. Anything in the world really has a positive and a negative side, and it's up to the individual to choose how they want to view something. And in a relationship, people are very deep creatures, okay? And when someone says something or they do something, it's really open to a positive or a negative interpretation. And if a person regularly sees things with a negative lens and they make negative assumptions or they jump to negative conclusions and they see the other person as saying things negatively or doing things that are negative, this very quickly destroys the relationship because it leaves the other person feeling wrongly judged, misunderstood, and it really is a horrible feeling when someone jumps to negative conclusions about you or makes negative assumptions, because really the other person should be making an effort to try and understand what was behind what you said or to understand why you did what you did. And if the person is jumping to conclusions or making negative assumptions instead of trying to understand you, then this certainly destroys the connection, destroys the relationship. And again, this negative lens, okay, and jumping to negative conclusions and making negative assumptions is also a very common symptom of unresolved past trauma and abuse, okay? So in a relationship, each person should be trying to ask questions, okay, to try and understand what's behind what the person is saying or what they're doing or even what they're feeling. Jumping to negative conclusions or making negative assumptions very quickly destroys the relationship and the connection, okay? So that's number 2, negative assumptions and jumping to negative conclusions. The third thing that very commonly destroys a relationship is emotional unavailability. Now, this is when a person is not emotionally available, okay, to provide empathy and to try and understand your emotions and to also understand their own emotions and to share what they're feeling. Emotional unavailability often comes from childhood emotional neglect, okay, where the child was emotionally neglected by their mother and or the father, or it can also have happened in a past relationship that was abusive or emotionally neglectful. So human beings have emotions, okay? We're emotional creatures. And in order for there to be a deep connection and intimacy, there needs to be emotional connection, which comes from each person being emotionally available to the other person and to be sensitive to their emotions and to be understanding towards their emotions and to be validating towards their emotions and to be available to connect on an emotional level. And if one or even two people in the relationship are not emotionally available because of past emotional neglect, or if they have dissociated from their emotions due to past emotional pain that is unresolved, then this is certainly going to destroy the relationship. And what generally happens is when there's emotional unavailability is that it will emotionally dysregulate the other person, which means that their emotions that are created in the relationship that don't get validated and understood, they build up over time, and their emotions become very erratic, and it's a very unhealthy existence, okay, to be emotionally neglected. It is a very silent form of emotional abuse, and it certainly destroys relationships. And it generally comes from emotional neglect from childhood or from a past relationship that was emotionally neglectful. Okay, so just quickly recap. Very common three things that destroy relationships. The first one is an ongoing feeling of resentment or a victim mindset. Okay, it destroys relationships. The second one is when a person jumps to negative conclusions or they make negative assumptions in the relationship about the other person. And the third thing that very commonly destroys relationships is emotional unavailability. Very common for these three things to have been caused by unresolved past trauma and abuse. So if you are encountering any of these three things on a regular basis in any of your relationships, please feel free to reach out. Make a comment below if you have any experience in relationships about these three common things that put a lot of pressure and stress on relationships. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content. I look forward to seeing you in future videos.